concept of artistic lineage from the story of Bezalel. Bezalel is an interesting personality that God introduces in history to assist Moses in the creation of the tabernacle. Most creative people, especially most church creative people, love Bezalel. So we go and sometimes when create Bezalel communities, Bezalel tribes. I know people who have companies called Bezalel because the orientation is a creative orientation. But to me, I decided to just go a little bit on a journey to see how is God introducing this personality in history. So Moses has been given the task of creating a tabernacle. And while Moses is on the mountain asking for sort of like more deeper counsel, how do I create, how do I produce this tabernacle? God tells him that I have a man in mind. And I just like how God introduces this personality. So he's called Bezalel, and he's telling Moses, just in case you're wondering which Bezalel, Bezalel the son of Uri, and Uri the son of Hur. So I like how God goes back intentionally into the history of Bezalel. So we don't just arrive. Bezalel is, we don't be, as artists or creative people, we don't begin at Bezalel. We actually arrive at Bezalel. We don't begin at Bezalel, we arrive at Bezalel. So here it is. The grandfather of Bezalel is called Hur. The father of Bezalel is called Uri. And then there's Bezalel himself. So when we talk about artistic journey, when I was teaching the first class, the artistic journey was more about how do we arrive as the representative personalities that God can count on to bring out creative expression. So it is incumbent upon us to study them, because God is very deliberate. He cannot be introducing us to 3 generations and not allow us to do it, to examine why is he introducing those 3 generations. So what is the name Bezalel? Bezalel means the shadow of God. The shadow of God. He comes from Uri, and Uri means the light or light. Old Testament concept, Old Testament theology, we have things there's an introduction of something called Urim and Thummim, which the Commonwealth of Israel used to use sometimes when they have to know, to be decisive, to know what God has favored, the Urim and Thummim. So the concept of Urim or Uri, to shed light, that is where the name Uri is coming from. So Bezalel, the shadow of God, comes from Uri. And Uri is the son of Hur. And Hur, one of the meanings of the word Hur is what? Noble or nobility. One who's noble, one who comes from the pedigree of royalty. All the 3 are of the children, or the children of what? Of Judah, the tribe of Judah. So God is very categorical. There's Judah producing Hur, who produces Uri, who produces Bezalel. So that's why I'm saying creative people, we don't just begin at Bezalel, we arrive at Bezalel. It's a journey. It's a journey. So there's nobility, there's light, there's the shadow of God. So let's just examine that a bit. Nobility, for me, represents identity. It is a sad day when you have a prince or a king who does not understand or does not know who he is. So we have to be rooted. In fact, there are 2 things you find there when you're going back into your artistic lineage. 2 things. Nobility is not just identity, there's a seed and there are roots. What are you banking on? Where are you stamped? Where are you concretely placed as far as your artistic expression is concerned? What are your seeds and what are your roots? What are roots? Roots are actually expressed seeds, and seeds are actually hidden roots. If you want to deal with something spiritually, you better deal with it at a seed level, because at some point when it docks and starts producing roots, it will be very difficult to chop off the tree, if you could say so. So most of us, when you have creative processes, most of us are dislocated. Most creative people are dislocated. And if you don't understand Huri, or if you don't understand the place where you are rooted, if you don't understand where you're supposed to be plugged, if you don't understand the roots and the seeds of your creative expression, then it means every piece of art you're going to be creating, or every song you write, every poem you write, you narrate, or every film you make, the signature of your creative expression will be a signature of searching for roots. And not to say that it's bad. I mean, at some point you have to find yourself, because if you don't find yourself, you won't lead people to where you're headed as far as Bezalel is concerned. So creative people have to find and identify their roots, be able to say, this is the philosophical framework of my creative expression. I'm rooted here, I'm plugged here. This is where I create from. That is Hur. And then you go to, if you have a concrete place of rootedness, then you can produce the next one, which is Uri. You can now produce or shed light. You cannot point. You cannot point. You cannot be somebody who illuminates. Your creative piece begins to sort of like what shines light, begins to create openings for people to see God for who He really is as far as creative expression is concerned. Because when people come and knock and sort of like embrace your artistic expression, they're able to capture some form of rootedness, some form of concreteness, some form of stability, some form of governance, some form of responsibility. So nobility produces light, and then now that's when you get to Bezalel. And the meaning of the word Bezalel is what? The shadow of God. Shadow of God. Now, before we are quick to sort of look at, the shadow of God means, most of us will most likely look at shadow of God from a very Anglo-Saxon perspective. Shadow meaning light, object, shadow. But that is not how it's represented, because the Bible says in James chapter 1 that God is the Father of lights in whom there is no shadow. So how come Bezalel is the shadow of God? Are we saying in the Old Testament there are shadows? It's, primarily, theologically, if you look at it, there are elements we see shadows. But until you are able to understand the concept, or the Hebraic concept of shadow, then you won't really understand who Bezalel is. So we did something with that in class. I took people to Psalms 91. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. And when you look at the Hebrew thought behind the word shadow, it's not how we look at it in physics, light, object, shadow. It is actually selem. The word is selem. We find that word in Genesis chapter 1. Let us make man in our own image and after our own likeness. Image is selem. Image is representative type. So Bezalel is a shadow of God, is a representative type of God's expression for creativity to build the tabernacle. He who dwells in the secret place shall abide under the shadow. Are you understanding that? So when you learn how to sort of like incubate in that secret place of God, there's an overshadowing of the image of God. Who is the image of God in the New Testament? Jesus Christ is the express image of the Godhead bodily. So you can see it's impossible for creative people to distance themselves from the centrality of the entire Bible, who is Christ, the image of God. You dwell in the secret place of the Most High, you are overshadowed by the image of Christ. You begin to produce very interesting, redemptive, creative things. And in any case, Christ himself, being the Word and the Logos, is the agency of all creation. By him, through him, for him, all things were created. So I say, Bezalel, you arrive at Bezalel, you have to have a place where you're rooted to produce light, to be a creative representative type of God. But there are secret places. There's like a place where you are always with God, where he whispers things, ideas, concepts, and therefore they hibernate or brood under the image of the Christ. And the creative person begins now to produce things that are redemptive, things that are cross-centered. Artistic expression that comes from the cross is very balanced. It deals with the before. It deals with the fall, and it deals with the redemption. The cross is a center figure. So a cross-centered artist is the one who understands rootedness, one who understands Uri, light, and one who arrives at Bezalel. And the truth actually is, most people, it takes sort of like some while. I mean, by the time you're doing maybe the first, second, third novel, or the first, second, third album of your music, or the first, second, third shot of your film, you are most likely at the point of discovery. And you'll find sometimes, if you're lucky and blessed, that some people take off knowing. Not everybody takes off knowing. Very many people, before they can arrive at Bezalel, they have to take that journey. That journey is crucial because you are assigned by God to come to a point as Bezalel, to create a tabernacle or a worship space where God can come and sit comfortably. You have to understand that this artist called Bezalel, the place we arrive at as creative people, was assigned to create an environment where God would sit and be comfortable. And one of the most important tool or concept or box he had to create was called mercy, the Ark of the Covenant. That Ark of the Covenant is creatively assigned to a person who has spirit and skill, Bezalel, spirit and skill, so that it is when God is placed, or God encases himself, or God incubates himself in that box, That is the tool that is going to deliver an entire nation to cross over to the promised land. That is how important creative people are. God is giving you an opportunity to create space or environment where he can hibernate or incubate himself, so that the entire church can use the presence of God to cross over boundaries or barriers which have stopped them from inheriting their promises. So don't look at yourself as I'm just an artist, I'm just a writer, I'm just a whatever. God has given you responsibility. He says, I have anointed him with my spirit. So this guy is not just skilled, he also has the spirit. And I love telling people nowadays that if you are to be trained or mentored by anybody else, then you have to be mentored by somebody who has both skill and spirit. The world largely has skill. The church fully has spirit and skill. Creative people have to understand that, because if you're going to produce the next generation of creative people, then you have to be full of spirit and skill. So that is the artistic journey in a nutshell. The people who most likely have been hindered arriving at Bezalel because of dislocation, huri. So there are a lot of offenses that have come into the artistic process that blind the path of the creative process, so they are not able to see what or where God is taking them in terms of the artistic journey. So it's important for us to understand, where am I rooted, what light am I producing, and how representative am I of God as far as my creative process is concerned.